Today's guest on the Best Boss Ever is Carlos Padilla. He is currently at the DOW company up in Michigan. Large company, $20 billion market cap. But his story about how he got there and actually the nature of the relationship that Carlos and I forged, because that's a story worth telling. His thoughtfulness, his professionalism, his follow-up, his overall approach to maintain a level of communication, open dialogue, totally impressed me. And what that then led to was Carlos and I striking up a relationship. It goes back several years, and the result is this episode right now. I couldn't be happier, Carlos, to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to always talk to you, and looking forward to the opportunity today.
Sport marketing, sport sponsorship, everything now that we've come to understand in the world of sport seemed to be in your DNA from the get-go. As a student in Tampa Bay St. Pete at South Florida, you've interned in the athletic department and became a sports marketing assistant. That then turned into a part-time paid job, and then a sequence of follow-ons from that: ESPN Game Day, Learfield, back to ESPN, NASCAR, all of which has led to where you are now as leading the sports marketing, sports sponsorship platform for DOW. Is an amazing trajectory and story. And come on, let's be real. You're mid-stride in your career. You're on your way to a great future. This is perhaps an interim stop along the way, but I want to hear, Carlos, as you got to where you are and you went through those various, obviously well-known and well-branded companies, how did you do it? Why did you do it? And first and foremost, share with us who were the best bosses, perhaps more than one, that influenced you along the way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Carl. And when you list it out like that, it certainly feels like I'm further along than midway. But I hope you're correct in that regard. Yeah, it's been a really unique career up until this point. When I really look across and look back, and again, listening to you list those off, having been on the property side, obviously the event side, the media side, working at the league level. I've been, on the B2B brand side as a vice president before, and then, obviously the B2C side during my time at Pit Boss. It's been unique. I basically kind of look at it as if I've sat really on every side of the table, really except for the agency side. So it's been unique. I find myself very fortunate. Try to be as humble as I possibly can. And, when you really look across that, those can be very different, from the other stops. And I've tried to always be a student of the game, and a student of sports marketing and really sports business. My wife and I joke around about it all the time. She's like, you're constantly reading about sports and sports business. We just got back from Alaska. We were on vacation. She popped over to me in the gym, and she poked my phone to see what I was listening to. And I was listening to a sports business radio spot. So for me, it's just about always trying to evolve and trying to learn. And that really did, come to be from a lot of the great leaders that I've had, to the namesake of this podcast, Your Best Boss Ever. I don't just have one, I have several throughout my career, and candidly, some of the best bosses that I've had from a learning experience perspective, maybe weren't the best day-to-day bosses that I've had throughout my career, but learning from the jump, during my time at University of South Florida on the multimedia rights side, selling sponsorships and really learning coming out of college there. Chris Leahy was the general manager there at the time. And, the first thing that he instilled into me was relationships. And, we're going to talk a lot of buzzwords here today, I imagine, but, we talk about relationships a lot in this business, but he really drilled it into me to develop great relationships, not only with your partners, but also with your internal stakeholders and also with those on your team. And what I learned over the course of my career with the beginning of that conversation with Chris was that creates a level of loyalty. And then when you have that loyalty, what that ultimately leads to is wanting to overperform and exceed expectations for one another on your own team, for your partners. And then obviously that translates into your personal life. I want to be the best husband I can to my wife. I want to be the best son, the best brother. And I want to exceed expectations in that way. And I can only authentically do that by having the right relationship and understanding, where that relationship lies and what it is that I can do to do those things. And that was really instilled to me right from the jump from Chris Leahy. And then that has just transitioned throughout my career and led me to great opportunities to over deliver and exceed expectations, not alone, but as a team, and has created some great successes across my career.
Right. Well, listen, that is exactly what everybody needs to hear, wants to hear. Loyalty in relationships is a two-way street. And the benefit of that you just very clearly articulated, because it does take initiative, it takes attention, it takes intentionality, all those things, and it takes purposeful activity, purposeful attention and loyalty. So as you traveled through, all these various elements, from media to rights holder to a college situation to Learfield, which represented colleges in the multimedia rights, as you learned more and more about sponsorship, what it takes to make sponsorship successful, because it has to be win-win, right? Buyer and seller both have to align on what the objectives are, what the KPIs are, and what the deliverables and activation strategies are. Talk to us a little bit about that and how you learned that craft, because it's not intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, if I can be fully transparent and candid and show some vulnerability, and I do believe vulnerability and humility are at the center of, authenticity in relationships. And I think that's true. I think you have to be able to raise your hand and say, when you don't know something. It's incredible, how often you find yourselves in meetings and people like to raise their hand and kind of grandstand a little bit because they don't want to be caught in a situation where maybe they're looked at like they don't know something. I find it to be more authentic, obviously, with being the opposite. Looking and sitting in front of a room and saying, I have the confidence to say that I don't know, right? I have the confidence to say, we're going to have to figure that out together. And I think probably, talking about vulnerability and to answer your question, the early part of my career, being the relationships, and investing in them, that was a learning curve for me. It was probably a little self-centered in the beginning. It was, create great relationships. I was selling sponsorships in the beginning of my career. I wasn't buying them. So for me, it was about hitting a sales goal so I could get my commission check. I mean, I was young. I wasn't making a lot of money. I was trying to make ends meet. I had student loans to pay. And, I didn't live in the cheapest place in South Tampa at the time. So, for me, it was, it started there. That obviously grew as I matured in my career. But I think one of the really big learning moments for me, it took me a few years to realize it, even after the moment that I'm about to share, was during my time at ESPN. It was a unique job that I had at ESPN. So I worked for this massive company. I think at the time we had 5,500 employees. We owned a majority of the rights in America, from motorsports to football to tennis and NBA and hockey and on and on. Obviously, we've seen that evolve over the years with multiple rights holders getting into the space. But when you look back in 2008, 2009, 2010, ESPN was really the big dog on top. And working there, I felt so fortunate, to be a part of that company. My role was to sell sponsorships within our college portfolio, but I also had a role in our events division, starting a bowl game in St. Pete. Now, not many people know, or maybe they do now, but back then, ESPN owned and operated, soup to nuts, 6 college bowl games. I think now they have up to like 20 games that they own and operate. It's basically free airtime for them if they own and operate it, because they're not paying a rights fee, right, to a league party. But back then I had the opportunity to come in and help start a bowl game from the ground up, which I learned a lot around operations and events. But at the end of the day, I was measured against how many sponsorships were I selling? Was I hitting my goals? And I remember, the way that we got measured at Disney and at ESPN back then for our annual review is they kind of ranked you on a 1 to 5. And they told you want to be right at 3. 3 means you're meeting expectations. 4 means you're exceeding expectations, and 5 means you're leading the way. And you're really not going to get a promotion unless you're going to hit a 4 or a 5 in multiple years. I was in year like 4 or 5 of my career at ESPN. I had exceeded my sales number every single year by double digits from a percentage perspective. Yet I kept landing right on track, right as a 3. And I remember I sat down with Clint Overby, who is the VP of events at ESPN, still currently to this day. And I said to him in my annual review, I said, Clint, I don't understand. Out of all the people on the team here for this event, you can quantify my results. You can quantify my productivity every year. Like, I'm not in operations, I'm not in administration, like I'm in sales, and I'm exceeding expectations every year by double digits. And yet you continue to give me a 3 as if like that's just what you expect. And I don't understand. I want to promote, I want to grow, I want to, I want to get to where I want to go. And I just don't feel like you're giving me that opportunity. And he said to me, Carlos, who do you think sets you up for success? Who sets your sales goal for you? I set you up to succeed. I set you up to exceed expectations. I expect that of you. You are doing everything that is expected of you. And I had a really hard time with that at that point in my career. I didn't quite understand what he was really saying. So it was funny, you fast forward and over the next several years, I had an opportunity to come on as an executive director of a different bowl game a couple years after that. And I left ESPN and then joined NASCAR and then got my first brand job. And you fast forward and I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, working for Exalta, running North America sponsorships for them. And I believe it was 2018 or 2019. So several years removed from ESPN, and reconnected with Clint. We had lunch one day and I said, hey man, I just got to share with you, a learning moment that I had with you that took me several years. And I walked him through that exact conversation, which he remembered well. And I said, you really made me realize that you set me up for success every day. And I probably didn't understand that back in that time. You really gave me the opportunity to exceed expectations. You gave me the opportunity to achieve. You gave me the opportunity to grow. And it was tough love back then. And maybe you didn't articulate it in the way that I wanted to hear it. But it had really set the standard for me to, one, continue to invest in relationships so you have that loyalty and can continue to exceed expectations. But as I gotten older throughout my career, start to mentor others to do the same for them and let them know that the baseline, for me in life and in my professional life is exceeding expectations. To me, that's where the baseline is. So now when you look at that of me being on the brand side, and I'm now buying sponsorships and dealing with people on the other side of the table that sit where I once did, I tell them that all the time. I say, there's a lot of rights holders out there we can spend our money with. And there's a lot of things that we can put into this contract. And I expect all of those things to deliver and hit the KPIs. But I'm going to measure you on how far you exceed those expectations.
Right.
That's what I'm going to measure this relationship by. And I really learned that through the tough love and that conversation that I had with Clint Overby. So certainly took kind of the iteration of that relationship thing from Chris Leahy over into the Clint Overby world. And it really has taught me a lot. And I think if you talk to a lot of people that work with me now, they'll tell you that's about my mantra.
That's super interesting to me. So I'm going to go back to that meeting with your direct report and his response to you that he set you up for success. So the hallmark of a great leader is knowing that there's capability that maybe the individual or the team doesn't know or doesn't believe about themselves, and puts you in a perhaps uncomfortable position so that you can do exactly what you just described, exceed expectations, look at yourself in the mirror and go, man, I didn't really know I could do that. And that's awesome that I did. However, there's a flip side of that coin, right? So you spend, 5 years at ESPN-ish, and you keep getting 3s. And so how long would you have had to stay there to get 4s and 5s? I mean, that's like, man, I'm spending 5 years in college and all I ever get is a C, yet I blow through my test scores, every single test. What's up with that?
Yeah, it's funny because, obviously Clint and I have engaged several times after the lunch that I mentioned with you that he and I had in Charlotte, where I told him how much I appreciated that conversation. And we've had a chance to bro out on that a few times. And he said to me, Carlos, man, it's been really fun. And I continue to enjoy watching your career and watching it continue to evolve in different ways, right? Like you look back and you look a lot, of people in sports and sports business. A lot of people kind of stay in the same lane, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. They stay in sponsorship sales or activation or on the agency side. And I've tried to, throughout my career, be as sharp as I can with every tool I can possibly acquire by learning new things. It's a different approach. You don't see that all the time. It's been the approach that I have found to be the most fun, candidly. But when you look back at that, I think that was part of that time at ESPN. Again, one day I'm selling a sponsorship, the next day I'm dealing with the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Tampa Bay, St. Pete, Clearwater, on tourism and hotel room rates for the teams coming in. Another day I'm working with bus companies and trying to figure out how can we fit them into the parking lot. So trying to be multi-diverse in what I do was very important to me. And whenever I had the opportunity, to leave ESPN and continue to grow that, just at that specific time and where ESPN was going as a business, that opportunity wasn't there. So I do believe that had I stayed on for ESPN for a couple more years, you'd probably still see me there, and I'd probably be in an elevated role doing who knows what. I truly do believe that. But no, I have nothing but gratitude for my time at ESPN and Pete Durzis and Brett Delaney and Clint Overby, and then all my colleagues, John Sacenti, and I can go on. But just a pivotal point in my career, and I'll forever be grateful.
No, that's really good. Because let's be real, you never know. You just don't know. I want to pick up on something you said just a minute ago, and that was you have spent the early part of your career on the sell side role, and the sell side involves lots of different things. You ticked off a few of them in your bowl game experience, and now you've migrate to big brand buy side, overseeing strategy, negotiation, execution, KPIs, activation, the whole kit around what a brand sponsor brings to the table, regardless of the entity, rights holder, league, team, or sport that brand chooses to invest in. However, my experience has been that when executives move from the buy side to the sell side, or from the sell side to the buy side in your case, that transition is not as easy as one would intuitively think it is, right? Hey, it's still sponsorship. I sold it for 15 or 18 years, and now I'm buying it. So there's nothing I don't know, and I think that's a real fallacy in transitioning from buy to sell or sell to buy. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I don't know that I could have said it any better myself. Certainly, coming over to the brand side for the first time, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in that. My first brand job was with Exalta. My second brand job, during the pandemic was Pit Boss Grills and Danson's, and where I elevated to VP of marketing. So above and beyond even the sponsorships by the time I left. And then now with the global Fortune 50, it has its similarities and it has its differences. But one thing rings true. Everything has its challenges no matter where you go. They just may be a little bit different. And, coming to the brand side, again, the low-hanging fruit, yeah, you're going to find some things when you come from selling to buying that you look right out of the gate and you say, okay, we can clean some of this stuff up. Maybe the person sitting in the seat, maybe we didn't have the right agency before, who knows, whatever it may be, whatever situation you might be walking into. But at the end of the day, one thing always rings true. You're always selling to somebody. Instead of it being an external sales, I find myself quite often internally selling and having to make that case internally. So that was a really, really big learning curve for me. I think also too, as I coach, folks that used to work for me or folks that I've come across throughout my career who are younger and seeking advice from me, doing whatever I can do to help them grow in this regard as well, as I always tell them, just because you have the magic recipe that you think works for a brand, when you go to pitch them, I promise you don't know 90% of it. Right. I mean, they know what they know. Certainly, there's a lot of tools out there now that, I didn't have available to me with Sponsor United and some of those other analytical tools that a lot of agencies have access to be able to pull what companies are doing and be able to do that in real time. So you can kind of match your assets up with, what you or what the brand considers a successful campaign and how you might be able to help exceed that. You can certainly do your due diligence, I believe, more now today than you could ever before. But at the end of the day, there still are elements to, being on the brand side that you just don't know unless you're on that side. And that's, continuing to sell, but this time it's internally versus externally. So not as easy as before. I will also say, being on the inside of a corporate environment, there's certainly a lot more politics that you have to be mindful of. And that's not always necessarily a negative thing. But whenever I found myself externally selling and outside of the office more often than I was inside of the office as a sponsorship salesperson, I didn't deal with too much internal politics. It was about sell and activate and drive results, right? That was what it was all about. Whenever you're on the corporate brand side, you're lucky if you can spend 10 or 15, 20% of your time on the activation elements of the contracts that you're executing. Majority of the time, you're working internally to try to drive awareness and try to work with everybody internally to get alignment. And also, it takes a village. You're working for a company the size of Dow. I have a lot of teammates that I need to get engaged in these partnerships before we extract full value, and that takes education. And then with a company like Dow, it takes time zone differences. Sometimes I'm on the call, calls at 5 a.m. with Japan. And you're dealing with cultural differences and activation differences. So it is very, very different. It is not as easy as you think it would be, but it's still a lot of fun.
Well, the internal sale is so important. It's the larger the company, the larger the brand, the larger the budget, the more internal selling is required. Because if there's a downturn or if there's a flattening, either revenue, profit, doesn't matter, the first place the CFO and her team is going to look is what are we spending in what might be called extraneous activities, right? Marketing, sponsorship, PR, those things invariably come into the crosshairs when it's cutting time. And if one hasn't done a good job on educating, explaining on the internal sell side on why what we're doing makes sense, why it's money well spent, how it's impacting objectively and subjectively KPIs in the bottom line, then you're going to be the first one on the chopping block.
For sure. I've seen that, and I've been a part of it candidly, and showing more vulnerability. I've been a part of a layoff in my career due to downturns in the economy, coming off my time at Axalta when the pandemic hit and everything in the world came to a stop. A lot of self-reflection took place, and I learned a lot there too. And it further reiterated everything that you just said to me around how you go about the internal sale. Listen, at the end of the day, it comes back to the strategy. If you build out the right strategy and you do it the right way, it's going to be better aligned to your business for you to be able to justify the expense and be able to say that it's performing for the company. When I look at Dow and the way that we're designing the strategy today, I'm going into 3 years, and it's taken me almost 3 years to get this, in the way in which I saw it going from the first day on the job. Things move a little bit slower than you want to, but the first thing we start with is our ambition, right? Which is what I call our why, our company values, and finding the right rights holders, whether in the current portfolio or maybe we need to relook at that align with your core values of who you are. That's the why. You then add into that mix, the contractual assets, and that's the how, right? How are we going to get to where we want to go? You divide that by your goals and objectives as an organization. What is it that the company's trying to do? Is it drive revenue? Is it to create more employee engagement opportunities? Is it to better align with opportunities for the company to recruit employees? What is that? You multiply all of that times the culture that you have as an organization, and then from that, you're going to have impactful and hopefully measurable results that you can quantify, with your company. And then you work diligently internally to communicate that way the best you can based on the resources available. I can tell you, here at Dow, I have an agency of record that I work with on communications, and about 50% of their scope of work is on internal comms and getting things posted to our intranet, and working with getting panel discussions at our corporate headquarters when we invite employees to come and listen to what it is that we do within sports marketing and why it works for the company. Certainly that is a constant sell and always what we're trying to do. And I don't find that to be much different than any of my other colleagues that are a cost center at Dow. And I don't feel that to be much different, during my time at Pit Boss and my colleagues or my time at Axalta. However, when you're a B2B company like Axalta, you're a B2B company like Dow, these are the most publicly facing assets within the entire global organization. So they're going to come with the most ridicule. So you have to be prepared for that at any given point in time. But again, it comes down to having the right strategy, measuring the results, communicating those out as often as you possibly can so that people are in the know, and then you back it up when you need to.
Well, that's right. And you said a thing like strategy, right? So let's just assume the strategy is correct. It's on point with the brand values, the brand architecture, the P&L objectives of the company, the divisions that the company wants to grow. All those things are in order. I would submit that unless there's a Carlos Padilla, not only who understands the strategy, but understands the executional rigor required to bring that strategy to life with boots on the ground, marketplace adjustments, pickup in media, benefiting from media value, media mentions, and then bringing all that background to that internal selling requirement that we just talked about. Execution trumps strategy every time.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But you have to have, to your point, the resources available to you to be able to measure those. Like when you look at DOW, we have 38,000 employees. We're all over the world. However, we have one sports marketer in the entire organization, and that's me. So I can't do all of this alone, right? Like you need agency support. You need to pull in internal resources from our brand team and our communications teams. You need to pull in external resources wherever you can. And you also, the thing that at least from my point of view, my job at DOW is to also understand what else is on the horizon. Who else is doing it better than us in our space? Best in class is something that we talk about all the time at DOW, and it's something that I've talked about my entire time being on the brand side now, going on the better part of 10 years. We may not ever be able to get there, maybe because we're not set up the way that we should, or maybe we can, depending on what partnership it is. However, that doesn't mean that we can't aspire to do so, but you have to have the resources to be able to do it. And to be able to put those into place. And that all is part of that sales process. It's not just the budget that you use to buy rights and assets to do activations. There is, every company is different, but from at least a DOW perspective, 50 to 75% more than we're paying in rights fees, we're paying in activation fees. So that's another thing, jumping backwards a step, if I could, Carl, when you talk about coming from being a seller to a buyer, or a buyer to a seller, understanding that side of it. I remember when I used to sell sponsorships, and I would go out and I'd have a meeting in New York, or I'd have a meeting in Tampa Bay, and I would go to pitch someone, and I would say, here, this deal is worth X, and we're going to sell it to you at X. And why would you not do that deal? Because it's going to provide a 4-to-1 ROI. What I never really understood, they would say it, but I didn't understand it because I had not lived it, was that it's not necessarily 4-to-1. They got to put another 75% above and beyond that just to be able to activate it and then measure it and then report it. So, whenever if there's any sellers listening here today, I would say you're selling a deal at $1 million, it's costing the client close to $2 million, and so whenever they look for results back to you and they're having a conversation with you over lunch a year later, it has to perform a 2, not at the 1 you sold it at. They're spending almost double that, if not in some cases more, especially if you're a consumer brand. So that's another piece I think that I didn't fully understand until I came over to the brand side. But yeah, you need to be able to measure it, and you need the resources to be able to do it.
That is super important in the world of sponsorship, because the rights fee is simply a license to spend more money. And if you're not, as a brand, willing to spend more money, if you will, hedging, activating, positioning, illuminating and amplifying the sponsorship platform you've bought into, you're not doing your job. And I would submit that, in my experience, 75 to 100% on top of the rights fee cost is the minimum that a brand has to spend. In many cases, it's 2x or 3x, with an objective of a 5 to 10x ROI on the aggregate investment, right? So companies measure those metrics in a wide variety of ways, but fundamentally, the rights fee or the sponsorship fee is simply an invitation, and I think a requirement to spend on top of that to bring to life the reasons why you actually bought the sponsorship in the first place.
Yeah, and I really think transparency in that is key in the relationship with the rights holders. Whenever I talk numbers with our rights holders, I'm not talking the number that's in the contract with that specific rights holder. I'm talking the number in the contract with rights holder with the pluses that go in above and beyond that for me to activate it. That's in the daily conversation. We're not talking, what I'm being invoiced for the year whenever we're talking about the performance of said relationship and said partnership. We're talking about the total number, and I let them know what that number is. And that's the number that we are both accountable to from a rights holder, perspective, a brand perspective, and a partner perspective. Those are the numbers. And that's the number that I want to hear them talk about as well. Not just the number they sold me on. Like, we're buying into this together, and you're understanding both sides of it. I'm very transparent about that, and I think that's key. In this world of sponsorships, everybody likes to be sneaky and quiet and might like to always talk about what the numbers are, and I don't really know what they're spending to activate, but I know what they're spending for the deal. I don't play that game. I've throughout my entire career, I think if you talk to anybody, they'll tell you I'm very transparent. I'm very accountable. I'm not afraid to say I don't know something. And I think transparency is key. Listen, if we're all sitting at a game, and I use this analogy all the time with my team and my agency team and our rights holders, I say, hey, if we're sitting together at a table and we're playing a game of cards, I'm going to lay all mine down and I'm going to show you what I've got. And if you do that, and you do that, and you do that, and you do that, we all know what we're playing with here, and we know what we all have to do to get a win for everybody. So, to me, when we talk these numbers, it's not just the rights fees. Everybody knows what we're spending. They know exactly how it's being spent, all the way to what I'm paying the agency to activate it, to what we're paying our brand ambassadors and our endorsement deals that are accompanying the deal. Everybody knows everything across the board, and you need to be comfortable with that because we're all accountable to it together. And I think that that's really key to be able to drive accountability and to be able to drive that loyalty, and that everybody knowing that you're transparent, so that you can continue to drive that over delivering and exceeding expectations that we talked about.
That is refreshing to hear, because not everyone in your chair, regardless of brand or organization, is willing to be transparent at that level. So DOW sponsors an array of assets, a venue, an LPGA golf tournament, perhaps many other sponsorship buys that I'm not aware of, and I'm not asking you to disclose what your budgets are. I rather think they're probably, 8 or 9 figures going north. That said, have you found, as a practical matter in the last 3 years, Carlos, that there is what I'll call a breadth of spectrum or capabilities on the sell side as you buy into, where that venue X or golf tournament Y or auto race Z has the capability or a better capability to understand what your KPIs are and how best to work together? Or do you start every one of those relationships at the same place?
Well, I'll start by answering your questions. I probably should do a better job of starting them all in the same place, because I do believe that I come into it with a little bit of bias. One, I find myself fortunate to have great relationships, and having sat on so many different sides of the table throughout my career, I've gotten to know a lot of great people, and a lot of great people that are either currently sitting in a spot that may be able to help me as a friend, or used to sit in a spot that may be able to help me as a friend, just from a console perspective as a friend. I also find myself having been and done deals at other places that I've been, and I've seen what's worked and what hasn't worked, right? So if it's either something that I've either directly been involved with or somebody that I may know that has been directly involved with something, typically those are the first 2 places that I go to try to gain immediate trust and try to really eliminate the learning curve, because where there's a learning curve in this business, there's loss. There's either missed opportunity or you bleed funds in areas as you try to figure it out. And I don't want to do that. The company certainly does not want to give me excess funds, and nor do we ever have those, or certainly don't ever have them to the extent that we would like, right? So typically I come into it probably with a little bit of those biases coming from one, if not both of those 2 angles. Now, however, there are times that, listen, we live in a world now where, and I say this to our current partners, and I say it to prospective partners all the time, there's new sports leagues popping up every day, new sports organizations popping up every day. And I think all of it is fantastic. I think the rise of women's sports is incredible. And DOW is happy and elated to be a part of the growth in women's sports in some of these new and innovative areas. But with that being said, there's more opportunity for more partnership, right? And the field gets a little bit cluttered. And you don't know everything, and you haven't partnered with everything, and you don't know everybody. So some of it you obviously do have to come into, the best you can, and with a little bit of trust, and try to learn, as you go, ideally with the right people next to you, the right agency partners, and inform people internally and externally along the way, so that you're not having the learning curve there. But nonetheless, we're always learning. The landscape is shifting quickly. I mean, I remember, 6 years ago, I was sitting around going, what is TikTok? And I think, if you don't have some level of TikTok strategy built into some sort of the partnership you do, whether you're a B2B company like DOW or you're a B2C company, you're probably have been passed long ago. So it's moving really, really quickly. You can't always move at the same speed. Most likely you aren't. You do the best you can, but you try to bring those that know, with you along the way.
Right. Well, that prompted in my mind a couple of questions. You and I talked before we started recording here about the legacy and the history of DOW and sports marketing. Can you touch on that a little bit and the importance of, in every sponsorship you do, deploying a product or a metric or an element that is DOW centric or DOW unique or DOW specific that allows you to help that internal sell as you buy sponsorship?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question. I think it goes back to talk on the strategy a little bit. But, to take a step back from that, Dow's been involved in sports marketing over 70 years. Going back to when Dow had a chemistry in a type of metal called Dow metal, which was used in an Indy car that raced in the Indy 500. That was our first foray into sports and sports marketing. And really the reason for that was to test a new product. Right? We are a science company at the beginning and at the end of every day. We are looking to innovate science of materials in ways that can create, and give us a competitive advantage with our customers. What better place outside of a lab to test the limits of material science than in the world of sport? Pushing the extremes of how fast a car can go. How quickly and cool can a brake pad cool down a rotor? How strong can a helmet take a hit without creating any damage? How much wear and tear can turf take, right, before compromising the athletes on that field? We want to learn so that we can develop better products for our customers. And outside of the lab, to reiterate, there's not a better place to do it in sport. So we have been doing it ever since our first foray into that with IndyCar about 70 years ago. And so really when you look across the landscape of sports, when people ask me the question, why is Dow in sports? You don't sell products to the everyday consumer. No, we all live with Dow products in our lives every single day. We sell to the factory that sells to the broker that sells to the company that puts the foam in your insole. But we are developing and innovating products every single day. There's no better place to do that than in the world of sport. And when we find the right partnerships that we can showcase the right technologies, we will partner with that sport. When you look at golf balls, majority of golf balls that are manufactured in the world use a Dow proprietary technology in the core. That's a great opportunity for us to sponsor the PGA Tour and the LPGA and be able to sit there with our customers at a hospitality activation and say, hey, look how we're innovating these products. We can talk to them about it in real time and show them the best golfers in the world using our products. Now, we may not have the IP to those products because maybe the manufacturer or the brand that actually creates the end product doesn't want to give away who they're working with for that proprietary material, but we can talk with our customers about innovations in those areas. Not a better place to do it than right there, in a football field for the Super Bowl or at a PGA tournament event or at the Masters or what have you. And then again, you align that with your ambition as a company, what your company's goals and objectives are in other areas like employee experience, customer engagement. Obviously, we talked about the innovation and science side of things, and you go on, and you can start to really go, okay, 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, and start to measure the KPIs across each one of those partnerships.
So you mentioned TikTok, technology platform, social media platform. That leads me to ask, how important does Dow believe that artificial intelligence, generative AI, this whole emerging platform, and let's be real, we're in the very early days. We're like on lap one of a 200-lap NASCAR race, okay? We don't know what it's going to look like 12 months from now, let alone 5 years from now. But has Dow, as a culture and a corporate entity, embraced this emerging technology, and how?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is yes, and we have, and we continue to, and we will continue to grow on that across all of our businesses. We use AI across the board. From our R&D folks are using it. We use it day to day, just in our general office administration. I think if you were to look at my Outlook calendar right now, you'll see that I have several AI trainings internally so that we can figure out how to better use the technology to become more efficient, with our time, with one another internally, but also externally. I think from a sports marketing perspective is probably the area I can speak to it the best because, AI is obviously being used a lot in measurement and analytics tools. As far as being able to recognize, what the quality score indexing is better than now than it ever has because of AI. From a measurement perspective, certainly we're using that. It obviously has created a lot of efficiencies with our agency partners to be able to do those measurements, to be able to do real-time media listening and social media listening to see where brand sentiment sits at any given point and be able to really, really give it that surgical precision to be able to tie down, okay, we saw a lift in the brand at this specific time. What else was going on at that, exact moment? And we can really tie that back to what's happening in real time versus, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that was much more of a task at hand. So we have adopted it across the board at DOW, from research and development to our day-to-day office tasks to obviously our sports marketing.
Love to hear that. I especially like the fact that if I looked at your Outlook calendar right now, I'd find multiple AI training sessions, and I applaud leadership at Dow to engage that way and invest in training, understanding, awareness of what the emerging tools are in AI and getting the Carloses of the world comfortable with that technology. Because the biggest thing I've seen in the marketplace is there's this fear factor, right? People are afraid to embrace AI. They're afraid they're going to lose their job. They're afraid that the AI technology is going to go so quickly, so fast, and so far beyond their intellectual capability to grasp it that they'll be forever less than the dust. And that is just fundamentally not true.
Completely agree with you. I mean, you saw this, with automation not too long ago, and you're still seeing it with automation today. And I think we're just at the next generation of that here with AI. I don't think you can be afraid of it. I think you do have to embrace it. At the end of the day, you need the human element. We all work with one another. We're all humans. Go back to, the crux of this relationship, or the crux of this conversation, the beginning of this conversation is about relationships at the end of the day. To me, I think that's where the magic happens. The magic does not happen in the transactions. The magic does not happen in jumping on a Teams call and talking with a customer. The magic happens when you're together and when you're learning more about one another and you're creating those authentic moments so that you can, again, over deliver, as I continue to say that. And that's not going to happen necessarily with AI. AI can maybe help you get better at how you do some of those things, but it can't create the magic. And so you have to lean in where you can, but you also can't forget that we're all people at the end of the day, and we're the ones that make the magic happen. And we should forever task each other and hold each other accountable on that.
Correct. We're collectively, in the world of business, a people business, period. End of story. And I couldn't have said it better, Carlos. That was a great way to end this. We've got a couple of minutes left. I always ask each guest the same three questions, the hot cues, if you will. First one is your favorite mistake. This is where you messed up big time, recovered from it, and took those learnings with you going forward.
Yeah, it's I have an easy one for that one, honestly, and being very vulnerable again. Using another one of my keywords for this conversation. My first opportunity to run something. I mentioned to you leaving ESPN and starting a bowl game down in Miami, Florida, as executive director in my very early 30s. At the time, I believe I was the youngest executive director in the bowl game business, close to it by about 10 years. And I really came into that role, with a hot head. I thought I knew it all. I had already started one bowl game before. I worked for at the time, the self-proclaimed worldwide leader in sports. I had the media experience, the sales experience, the community relations building experience. Also had to oversee all of our social media, PR, everything external affairs related to that time that I was with ESPN within our events division for our specific office in St. Pete, Florida, while also having the opportunity to sell, on a national level. And getting into a dynamic market like Miami was no different, or I thought was no different than being in a dynamic market with a lot of legacy in that space in Tampa Bay. And I learned really quickly, after about 18 months, that maybe I bit off a lot more than I could chew. Unfortunately, it was not biting off more I could chew in just one area. It was in several areas. And my ego got the best of me. I can't give you one specific example that I learned from, but I can tell you that overall it was just a learning experience for me in general. I think the market created a bit more of a challenge for what a college bowl game at that level could be. We ended up selling that game, ironically, to ESPN, my former employer, and they ended up turning it into a bowl game and moving it over to Texas for some of those reasons. But there is no doubt that my approach with that role certainly could have been much more mature. But listen, I took that, you talk about learning experiences. I took that as an opportunity to take a step back, forever a student of the game that I mentioned at the beginning, and try to become much more of a humble and vulnerable person. And from that, I think I've created better relationships and done a better job of exceeding expectations. Back to my conversation with Clint Overby. So for me, that was the biggest learning curve. But hey, listen, it's probably not the last one I'll have. I know that. I try to approach things a little bit differently, and hopefully the next one won't quite hurt as much.
Right. Well, that last part is for sure true. We, as much as we like to think we've learned all the answers to every conceivable circumstance, not true. We're gonna make mistakes, and the beauty of that is you learn from it. I think that's the essence of not only self-awareness and vulnerability, but the ability to take a step back, reflect, dissect, understand what and how went awry, learn from it, and you have that now forever in your memory bank. You're not going to do that again, right? So that's a really good one. The second question is, this is the favorite concert you ever attended live, where a female singer-songwriter, female artist, or a female-led band was the headliner.
Yeah, that's a funny one. I have to go with Stevie Nicks. I was raised by a single mom in the Panhandle of Florida, and didn't have a lot of say in what was played in the house. And I would say that my mother is still a huge fan of Stevie Nicks. Separate from her, her time with the band and as an individual artist. And if you were to tell me that 20 years ago that I would have answered your question in this way, I wouldn't have. But as I've evolved and gotten a little bit older and had and grown my appreciation for different types of music, I certainly appreciate my mother piping that through the speakers when we were cleaning the house and getting dinner ready as a kid, because I had the opportunity to see her live while I was hosting some clients at a concert at the amphitheater in Tampa several years ago. And forever will remember that, and it brings back a lot of memories anytime I hear that music. With that time that I had with my mother as a child. And I'll remember that for the rest of my life. And my wife and I were actually just talking about it the other day. We just got back from Alaska, and we were looking at the concert calendar. We see that she's coming to Michigan pretty soon, so we're going to try to make it.
Go for it, man. She's great. And she's 40 years on, right? She's unique in that regard. She's got a great voice, great show person. And by the way, I'd be lying if I said several of your prior now colleagues who have been on the show have called out Stevie Nicks. Good one. So last question. We all know words matter. As leaders, it's what you say, and then many times it's what you don't say, or how you say what you say. So the question is, your favorite word and why?
Oh man, my favorite word and why. You probably heard me say it. I think you definitely have heard me say it several times in this conversation we've had here today. I think it's a tie of several words that all link together to basically mean a lot of the same, and that's accountability, that's humility, and that's character. I mean, you said to give you one, but to me, you really need all three. Being able to say you don't know, being able to say, you messed up, being able to say, we're going to figure it out together. I think to me, nothing shows vulnerability more than that. I am a huge fan of Brené Brown and her foundational teachings on vulnerability. I truly believe that the cornerstone of confidence is vulnerability. And if you can be vulnerable in front of others, you're probably the most confident person in the room, because most people can't be. And I think with that, you will find better relationships and better follow through, not just in work, but in your personal life. I'll flip that. The better your personal life, the better your work life. So long answer to your question about one word, but it's that one for me.
Well, no, it's a good one. And that ethos, if you will, threaded its way through this entire conversation, Carlos. So you are walking the talk Okay, in this case, you're walking the word or the words, and I very much appreciate it. And I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time on the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Hey, thank you so much. I always appreciate talking to you anytime.